Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and this is a show where you can have your property related questions answered by our team of experts. And joining me today is John Howard, developer, author, property expert, mentor. What else are you, John?
Someone who gets here very early.
Yeah.
I got the time wrong.
Well,
It's nice to be early though, isn't it?
well, then I think you should learn to read your
I should take more time reading my emails.
Yeah, well, there you go. Okay, now joining John today is Vincent Wong, Director of Wealth Dragons Group PLC. Welcome to you.
Thank you very much.
I think this is your second appearance now, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Oh, that's good. Good to see you back. Okay, well, we're going to get straight on with the questioning. And John, you're going first. Do the panel think that the raft of legislation due to be brought in by the current government will A, be brought in by the time we have a general election, or B, will in any event be scrapped by a new incoming government?
That's a great question. Sounds like someone who potentially or was a Conservative voter and now probably isn't.
Is that yourself?
No, it's not myself at all. I would say that, I mean, the Tories know they're going to lose. So they are trying to push through as much new laws as they can prior to, cut-off date. And of course, it's all about the House of Lords because the House of Lords have to approve it or not. It goes back to the Commons again. Very interestingly, I was talking to a candidate the other day, and what he was saying was that when Labour get in, although they don't want to retain the House of Lords, they're going to have to make at least 50 new Lords themselves, Labour peers, in order to get their laws through the House of Lords. So the whole thing is just a bit of a farce. And I think the Tory aim is to get as many laws as possible through before the deadline. Whether they'll manage it or not, or whether, of course, the House of Lords will do their best to stop it happening, to eke the time out to when the general election is called. Then we go into what's called purdah, and when purdah comes in, no laws can be made. The House of Commons doesn't sit anymore, and all the ministers are no longer ministers. They go back to being candidates again and have to reapply, of course, to get elected again.
Is that why there's a reluctance to name the day?
Absolutely, because they know they've got a lot of work to do, a lot of laws to try and get through. And of course, some of these laws will be difficult for Labour to unravel. And that's what they're hoping, that they can't unravel them all. But like you said, like the person who's emailed in said, are they going to be able to? Some of them, yes. Some of them they may want to keep and blame the Tories, but actually would have done the same thing. Don't forget. So,
but I mean, I know what you're saying about the timing. But there was an article in the papers the other day saying that people were complaining that the House of Commons, at least, is sitting the least it's ever sat. They're doing short hours, they're doing short days, taking extra holidays. So there doesn't seem to be an enthusiasm from the Commons' point of view. But I can see the point of trying to get things through the Lords might be.
I think that's the challenge for them. And the challenge for Labour will be finding enough new peers to put in the House of Lords, bearing in mind that they want to scrap it. I mean,
well, obviously this question's come from somebody who's interested in property. And shall we have a go at answering the question?
Yes, what was the question? Remind me.
Which is...
sound like a politician, don't I?
Yes, yeah, exactly. So,
what's the question?
Well, do you think that they will get things through before the next election? Or on top of that, do you think if they do, will Labour just scrap it when
Well, I think the rent reform bill is the renters reform bill is the big one. But of course, I tried to find out the other week, last week from my MP where it is, and he wasn't sure where it was in the process. They've had over 100 different amendments to that.
Wow.
So that's a lot of work to unravel. So whether they're going to kick it into the long grass for Labour to take up, and Labour will take it up, and they'll be stronger and more tougher on landlords, certainly, than the Conservatives have been. The Conservatives have been pretty tough on landlords. So you can expect it to be worse if Labour get hold of the renter reform bill.
Yeah,
definitely.
I suppose the only saviour there, you're probably referring in the main to rent caps and things like that, but they've been tried in other countries now, in the United Kingdom and abroad, and they just don't seem to work, do they?
But they're going to do something.
Well, I mean, there are 11 million renters there, so it's definitely going to be a very popular vote, and they'll definitely try to do their best to push it through.
Yeah.
But would it work? I think it's, of course, from the renters' perspective, it's going to be very much welcomed. But from the investors' perspective, it's just it's going to take a lot of newbies out of the game.
Well, I think so. I mean, I just think the whole rental market needs a good look at, and in terms of what landlords are offering, you know, whether it's short-term lets, long-term lets. I think there does need to be a differential between the two. I think I understand the government's nervousness about sort of small landlords perhaps not having the financial wherewithal to give tenants a secure future. You know, it may be.
Why should they give them a secure future? At the end of that, it's their property.
Well, yes,
it's not the renter's property.
I agree it is, John, but there is a market for long-term rental in this country, far more than there was 20 years ago. You know?
Yes, so I don't disagree with that.
I just think there are different forms of renting that should be available, and it just takes a little bit more thought than currently being given.
What they've done in Ireland's a good idea, where the longer you rent your property out for, the better tax incentives you get.
Yeah.
That would be quite a...
Or again, if you go in for a second term.
Yes.
You know.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that, John.
Pleasure.
Vincent, at least one building society has recently reintroduced the availability of 99% mortgages. That used to be 120% with some people, didn't it? But anyway, i.e. a facility with a 1% deposit. Do the panel think this is a one-way path to reintroducing irresponsible lending?
Absolutely, Stephen. I do believe so, because I think history does repeat itself. If we look back at what's going on back in just all the years leading up to the crash in 2008, you can see banks' behavior was absolutely deplorable. How they would lend to people who couldn't afford. And yet when things went sour, they would persecute people, and then they got bailed out. So I just think that this is what's going to happen, because 1% deposit is just a ploy to get more people to borrow. And I think what's important is to really look at people's affordability rather than just looking at the marketing ploy. And
but was it our own market that caused the trouble, or was it the American subprime market?
I think that there's a knock-on effect, but it actually did affect the UK. I mean, if banks weren't lending irresponsibly, then they wouldn't have to be bailed out, and they did using taxpayers' money. And banks have zero risk because they borrow money from the money market using savers' deposits to lend to homeowners and savers, securitizing on their properties. And yet, when things went wrong, they weren't held accountable. And that's absolutely terrible. And also another thought was, the government is also partly responsible for promoting the merits of home ownership. That, I mean, everyone should have a property that they can call home. An Englishman's home is the castle. So why, if people fall into difficulties, they couldn't get bailed out by the government? Why not? Just a thought.
Well, just hold on though. I mean, although you say the government encourage home ownership,
they do.
They do, but it has to be for the right reasons.
Yeah,
because
to get more votes.
Well, yes, but
and not putting burden on pension.
But as a homeowner, you just pray for inflation, don't you?
Yeah. Well, you've done all right out of it.
Well,
haven't you?
Yeah, but I've been at it long
Vincent's done all right out of it. I've done all right out of it. So can I disagree with Vincent at this point?
Of course you can, yes.
So Vincent, I sort of understand what you're saying, but what I would say is the people who are paying rent and who can prove that they've paid rent successfully at a certain level for, say, 12 months, perhaps should be able to qualify for a 1% mortgage, because they've proved that if the mortgage is less, payments are less than the rent they were paying, then surely, even if it's 7 times, 8 times their income that they can borrow, then surely that is enough to prove to anyone that they can pay the mortgage.
Yeah.
Whether it's 1% or whether it's, 10%.
I mean, the government are saying the danger is that with a 1% deposit, the problem is it only takes a slight glitch in the market and you're in negative equity. I think my counter argument to that is, well, so what? You shouldn't be buying a home to sell it the next.
Yeah.
It's a long-term investment.
And negative equity is not a problem. It's affordability.
Agreed.
People's circumstances change, right? You might be able to afford it or prove that you can afford it.
You can always take out some insurance.
Yeah, of course, there is that as well. But I think banks should definitely be more responsible, and maybe more restrictions on lending should be imposed.
Personally, I'd like to see us go back to specialist lenders like building societies who do nothing else but finance, private homes. I think the banks are very prone to, have different sort of views in different years. Sometimes they encourage private house lending, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they just prefer commercial lending.
I really think the key is the rent.
We need to be consistent.
The key is if they can pay the rent and their repayments on their mortgage are going to be less than what they've been paying in the rent, then hey, whether they've got a 1% deposit or 10% shouldn't make any difference. That should be the qualifying feature, in my view.
Okay, well there we are. That's all we've got time for in this half of the show, so join me again after the break when we'll be asking John and Vincent more of your questions. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time, and I'm joined by John Howard and Vincent Wong. Welcome back, guys.
Thank you.
John, although the government seems keen to scrap the concept of leasehold and substitute share of freehold, do the experts think that the property occupants are actually capable of running their own buildings and fulfilling management functions in an ever-increasing complexity of management and accounting issues relating to property matters?
Well, this government and actually Margaret Thatcher started the Leasehold Reform Act all those years ago. So for Labour to say, well, the Conservatives haven't done enough for leasehold flats and leasehold reform, I think is a bit of a cheek, because actually they've done a lot more than Labour have done. However, Michael Gove, who's the Housing Secretary, wants to get to a point where, similar to Scotland, and I'm doing some deals in Scotland, I'm developing some flats in Scotland where, it's a shared freehold. And actually, when it comes down to it, it's not a lot different to England. So they've now brought in a 999-year lease. Every new lease is 999 years at 0 ground rent in England. So that's virtual freehold. They've also, under Margaret Thatcher, started the process of allowing the leaseholders to purchase their own freehold. If they wish to, they can manage it themselves and still have it owned by someone else. And I've had freeholds taken off me by the lessees who want to manage it and own it themselves. So these rules have been out for a long time. There is some bad publicity around some of the property management companies. I accept that. Some service charges going up, dramatically and all the rest of it. But let me just mention this. If a freeholder who owns the block is not getting any rent from that, so the ground rents are 0 now, what incentive is there for anyone, be it the residents of the block or anyone else, to own that freehold? Because there's no incentive. And the laws are so onerous now on the property management companies, the government have tightened it even further. So it's a little bit like people that want to buy the local pub. They all think it's a great idea for about 6 months. And they buy it, and for 6 months it's busy. Then guess what happens? Everyone loses interest, and suddenly it's not good news. And I think this is what may happen with some of these freeholds.
Well, John, if you just excuse me for a minute, I think I want to explain to our viewers the difference here. We're talking about leasehold, which effectively means that you have a head landlord, if you like, a head leaseholder, who grants you a lease, a freeholder, which grants you a lease, and that lease in London in particular used to be sort of probably 99 years, perhaps 125. Now the law says it has to be 999. Yep. Great news. It stops
great news for you lot. Yeah. Well, you're a leaseholder, not for me. You live in a lovely,
Well, I'll come to that in a minute.
Good.
But the key to this, and the reason that this was brought in the first place was so that somebody had legal control of the building and could ensure standards throughout the building.
Yep.
The gardens were maintained, the balconies were looked after, the roof was always in repair, the heating system, if it was communal, was managed. And it's a way of controlling what goes on in that building. Now, the danger is that we've had a number of rogue landlords that have manipulated that service charge, that charge that they can charge for maintaining the building. That's bad news. And we've also had one or two house builders that, for no reason whatsoever really, have just made their houses leasehold in the way of being able to charge a ground rent for them, which is quite unnecessary. If you sell the thing, you sell the thing.
Totally.
And so there's been a lot of discussion about this, a lot of conflict in terms of bringing in legislation. I think it's quite dangerous, John, as you say, for the landlord to have no incentive to hold on to the freehold, because the real problem is, if the residents don't pay a service charge, if they default or are late, actually it's the freeholder that has to put his hand in his pocket to legally keep that building going. And I think you need that person. Now, whether it's in the form of an investor who's bought the freeholder or the original freeholder himself, I don't think it matters. But I think that structure needs to be there in these, multi-unit blocks. Would you go with that?
I just think if there's no incentive,
it's
what's the point?
Yeah.
No honey, no money.
Yeah, but the question is whether if the residents get a share of the freehold and they manage to block themselves, would they do a better job? I think that's part of the question.
That is the question. But I mean, Vincent, look out of the window. Well, look out of that window. You're looking at a 70-story block there.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll guarantee you that 65% of those people who own the flats live abroad.
Yeah.
And, they're all very keen to run the block and look after it and have their say about it until you ask them for some money. And then they disappear like a rat of a drain pipe and never heard of again. And I'm sure, John, you've experienced
managing a big, any block of flats is a real responsibility, and these days extremely onerous. So it's onerous on the freehold, and the freehold gets taken off them, and it's now the leaseholders who are doing it. It's incredibly onerous, especially, and also on the management company, because these leaseholders will not be able to manage it without the help of a management company.
No.
Yeah.
So what's the difference?
And wasn't the original idea to own a share of freehold because the property value would go up?
Yes. Well, Randolph Churchill in 1800 and something brought this to Parliament and said we should scrap leasehold.
And what did you say?
And I said, no. All those years ago.
He nearly missed it.
So it's been this argument and this conversation's been going on all that time. It's amazing.
Yeah. Okay, Vincent. There seems no doubt that smaller investors in the buy-to-let market are being discouraged through either taxation or legislation. Are the panel content to see the majority of rental housing stock transfer to an institutional level of corporate investor? And if so, what overall effect will it have on the national rental market?
Well, definitely the days of being individual landlords to buy one buy-to-let property and manage it themselves is pretty much over, especially since the abolishment of the mortgage interest relief by George Osborne back in, was it 2017? It was.
Something like that.
Yeah, and so in fact, a lot of existing buy-to-let investors don't even know that they're being charged huge amount of money by the government for taxation. So now I think obviously the market is definitely dampened and fewer people are coming into the buy-to-let market. The ones who do are the ones who are in the know and they're more knowledgeable and they start setting up limited companies, which is a good thing because I believe fundamentally there's a huge paradigm shift from being an individual landlord and being a business owner, being a director of a company. The latter would be more inclined to invest in their properties, maybe fix up problems, and maybe to think about scalability. Because after all, if you own one buy-to-let property, sinking 25% deposit on a buy-to-let to make a few £100 a month is not really that profitable. You really, as a business, have to think about scaling. I think that's a good thing from an investment perspective, but from the tenants, I think they're probably getting better services, getting better living conditions, because I think the traditional landlords were more inclined to fix problems up themselves in order to skim on costs.
But as John alluded to earlier, there are no incentives to scale, are there really?
Well, if you're a business owner, then your mindset will be one that you treat it as a business, and all businesses have to scale. Otherwise, you don't have a business. So we think about how.
But there's no government incentive to scale, is there?
I don't think it's the government who is responsible for incentivizing businesses to grow. I mean, the government doesn't incentivize my business to grow. As a business owner, you have to start thinking about strategies of how to find better deals, how refinancing works, how to recycle the deposit to buy the next property in the right location, so that you can build a portfolio.
But Vincent, what about, you say like any business is not entitled to or doesn't get much from the government. I think they do. You get allowances, don't you, on capital equipment that you buy?
Do me a favour, Stephen. Come on, Stephen. I can't believe you're supporting, I mean, honestly, what has this government done? And you know how I vote, but what's this government done to help small landlords? It's done nothing. And now the interest rates are high, you've got to put a 40% deposit in, haven't you, Vincent?
But that's the point, John. If you mentioned earlier, if there is some incentive, like you get a perhaps lower taxation
but they haven't done that, have they?
if you stay in. Well, that's the point. They haven't done it. There's
they abolished the mortgage relief.
They made it harder.
Harder. Exactly.
I mean, 4 million landlords in the UK renting out their property. It's a massive market.
My point was, if you're a manufacturer or an engineering company or something like that, you do get all sorts of tax breaks, but you don't in property.
Yeah, but as entrepreneurs, when you become a business owner, which essentially you will be when you're a buy-to-let landlord operating a limited company, you have to really think of ways to grow your business, and that means you have to have a different mindset altogether. You're not. I think you've got to get better quality landlords because they'll be more incentivized to develop the knowledge of property and the company and how to raise finance, how to expand the portfolios.
Well, I suppose the other thing is the whole reason I think that the government have pushed people down the route of limited companies is so they have an annual return. Because I'm sure there was people who are selling their property that they weren't living in, not paying the tax.
Are you thinking of anybody in particular?
I'm thinking of a certain Labour MP. But I mean, there's others, I'm sure, who weren't paying the tax on that. So I think by making them or incentivising them, if want of a better word, to put them into a limited company and having to do an annual return, gives the government some control over that situation.
And there are also many shabby landlords who just get into buy-to-let because of hearsay, and they simply don't know what they're.
It's a bit harsh on Stephen, that, isn't it?
Listen, I have no buy-to-let properties whatsoever.
They do a terrible job.
Yes, I don't disagree.
Okay, well, that's all we've got time for. So my thanks to Vincent Wong and John Howard for joining us today. My name's Stephen Galpin. Join me next time on Property Question Time.